Okay, and we are live. Well, welcome to the August monthly meeting for RunJumpDev. We've got Jerry Belich this month, who is the creator of several awesome hardware games, such as the Choosatron that you may have seen before, the self-contained device that lets you play choose your own adventures on a thermal printer away from a PC, with buttons for picking choices. Or right now, I think your current development game, you just showed it off at ALT.CTRL.GDC, right?
Yeah, I guess I always kind of am. Yeah, I've got a few games that I just finished kind of polishing up from the last Alt-Control, and then some new stuff for the next one, and for kind of the continual stream of festivals and events and everything that's going on. So there's always a lot of new stuff in the pipeline.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks everybody for letting me come talk to you. I apologize if I sound weird or have to blow my nose. I was just in Chicago last week for a festival called Bit Bash, which is really, really fun. And I brought a cold back with me, so that was a great souvenir. So I can't really see how many of you are actually there in the physical space, but
20 maybe?
About 20? So I guess I'll rely on somebody to tell me the answer to any stat-based questions on on our audience. And I know we're, of course, streaming as well, so don't want to discount people out there. So, yeah, as you said, I worked on stuff like the Choosatron, and most of my game design work is focused in the physical and the hardware arena. And the reason for that is a bit varied. Up until about 2.5 years ago, I had been working at an agency in Minneapolis, Minnesota, running their mobile development team. And so, obviously, primarily I was developing applications and sometimes games for Android and iOS, although even games at that point. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. But even the games were, primarily kind of ad games, so not necessarily hyper fulfilling if you have an interest in game design, which I always have. About 10 years earlier, actually, at the end of high school, I had gotten involved with some friends on making games, and we had a series called Pac Guy, which were a ripoff of Pac-Man combined with whatever else we happen to like at the time, like Star Wars and Star Trek and all sorts of stuff. We somehow got those published by a local publisher called ValueSoft, which is also in Minnesota. Didn't go particularly well, and they got lots of money, and we got very little. So we got a little burnt out on that, and then I just kind of veered back into kind of a normal tech career and doing video work and effects stuff. And I always particularly enjoyed bringing interactivity and multimedia into physical spaces. Moving back to the agency job I had at Clockwork, one of the opportunities I had there was to work on a large-scale installation at a casino in Las Vegas called the Cosmopolitan. And the project consisted of 8 giant columns in the entryway with high-definition monitors edge to edge all the way around those columns. And so I was working with a small team of 2 other people to write the software to manage all of that. So it was like 384 displays. Working on that, especially with the content team, they were working on the simulations that were running around the columns. They talked about things like Arduino a lot and all sorts of different tools that they used in hardware prototyping. And I had mentioned to them on one of our calls, I was like, oh, I heard a lot about Arduino. It looks really fun, looks really interesting. But it was always one of those things where I didn't really know how to dip my toes into it and didn't know necessarily what I was trying to get out of it. And as a result, I never kind of took that leap. It was too mysterious, and electrical engineering and hardware stuff, just didn't even know where to begin. Software, easy. Not to mention it's a lot cheaper to break software. So after mentioning that, they'd sent me an Arduino in the mail about a week later. And so I had that, and I was like, okay, well, now I have one of these things. I need to figure out what I want to do about it. And I started going to a few websites that had a lot of parts, like Adafruit.com or SparkFun.com, and I just went alphabetically. Just every single part they had, because I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I wanted to know what are the possibilities in this kind of space. And since this was probably 3.5 years ago, um, there was certainly a maker movement, but I want to say it was still kind of I mean, even now it's still a very fresh territory. So, oh, I started echoing. So, after going through all these different parts, I had noticed a few that fit some concepts and stories and games that I'd wanted to try developing for many, many years, like the thermal printer and the coin acceptor. And after seeing those, I was like, I want to make a choose your own adventure arcade machine. And that was where the Choosatron came from. Just kind of these free-floating ideas that I'd had that found a place where they could kind of collide because of my love of arcades and my love of storytelling. So I had ordered the parts, and I started working on figuring out how to talk to each one of those parts individually. Now, the good thing about something like Arduino, and I'm curious, like, how many of you, at least in the room that I can see, know what Arduino is or have heard of Arduino but have never actually used one? Yeah. So how many of you have actually worked with Arduinos or made anything? Okay, so a few of you. So the good and the bad of something like Arduino is it's become kind of this, like the Kleenex brand of hardware or the maker movement. And that's because it's built up such a great community. It's become very available. The designs themselves are open source, which is a big deal because if you actually develop something that you want to take further and you want to potentially manufacture, it's a huge cost savings to have a design to start from that's open source so you can remold that into the project that you're building, especially if it runs on Arduino. Then it's just what kind of form factor do you want, and being able to move from there. So Arduino has done a lot for getting people introduced. The negatives, especially I think as you move forward in that field, are that it is relatively low powered in terms of the clock speed is very, very slow. Uh, I think it's 16 megahertz, like in an Arduino Uno. You have about 2 kilobytes of space for your code, which is very, very, very little space. And that's actually what the first Choosatron ran on, which was a bit of a challenge because one story on its own is far larger than that. And so I basically pulled out every nasty little trick I had in order to make the software small enough to fit, and then was streaming it off an SD card. The thing that I didn't like about that and about some of that environment is it felt like it was, I have experience doing C and C++ coding, especially lower level, but I don't think a lot of people do, especially nowadays. And as a result, there's a really high barrier to doing more advanced work in Arduino and just in general. The good thing about the Arduino, though, is you've got so much of that community, and you have a lot of people that are creating code samples as messy or clean or organized as they might be, but it's still a challenge kind of pulling those pieces together and making something. So with the Choosatron, basically I went through a Kickstarter, and with that was able to I'll actually just start sharing my screen here so I can show a few things. So yeah, so Choosatron turned into, like, from that small, weird little storytelling box running off an Arduino. I think I've got a picture of the originals here. So here are the 3 original prototypes. As you could probably guess, the one on the far left is the first, and I used a shipping box that I happen to have gotten from an Amazon shipment, and along with a front-loading coin acceptor, the thermal printer, and inside is just a small breadboard duct taped to the bottom of the box that had all sorts of wires that every time I took it over to someone's house or an event, some wires would pop out, and then I would sit for 15 minutes trying to figure out which wires it was so that I could actually get it working again. Which, if anybody knows kind of the fun stress and pressure of trying to demo something, that's usually when it falls apart, and usually when it breaks. And even after the Choosatron was quite polished, I had a situation. I was in Austin for Fantastic Arcade, and a friend of mine came up and was like, "Oh, hey, Jerry, I want you to meet Tim Schafer." And I was like, "Oh my God, Tim Schafer. That's really cool." And he's like, "Oh, you gotta try the Choosatron." And of course, the Choosatron I had with me, I hadn't been presenting it there, so it was basically just so I could work on it. And so it was one of these clear models. And I had some unstable firmware on it, so as soon as I tried to show it to him, it stopped functioning immediately. And it continued to not function for the next 10 minutes as laptop in hand, I was trying to get to a stable build. And eventually he politely said, "Hey, I'll be around, but I gotta go." So that was incredibly embarrassing, and which brings me to one of the probably biggest lessons I have learned with doing hardware, and especially bringing different hardware projects to events like GDC or BitBash or Fantastic Arcade, is a lot of work needs to be put into stabilizing the hardware and preparing yourself for the fact that people are going to be very, very hard on it, and you will probably have to babysit your work the first time, no matter what. Now, projects like this, this is Cooking Mama, and this is a plastic kitchen that we got off Craigslist for about $5, and just over a one-day hack day wired up. The beauty of it was just one day of effort and just throwing what we could think of at it to try and make kind of an interesting toy or an interesting experience. But the problem was, we're like, "Oh, well, that's great. Let's bring it to GDC for ALT.CTRL." And the thing almost never worked correctly at all. And part of the problem was it wasn't kind of the project that we were really focused on. I also had A.F.T.E.R.G.L.O.W, which is let's see. So A.F.T.E.R.G.L.O.W is a rotary dial kind of Soviet war game. And that was kind of the project that I was really sinking my teeth into at the time. And so Cooking Mama actually became a much bigger burden than it should have been. So I'm learning more and more when to kind of set something aside and wait for the next event to come along or the next opportunity. But on the other hand, I think especially if you want to get into hardware and try stuff out, it's very similar to if you're working on a digital-only game. You do need to get yourself out there, and you need to be at events, and it's going to be really, really exhausting because of all the fixing and re-hot gluing, as the case may be, and getting it working for kind of those moments. But thankfully, I've kind of acquired enough experience now where I can be a little bit more prepared, and I'm making better decisions about what projects aren't going to be worth it. Another one here is Tank Top. And this one was made on the train jam from Chicago to San Francisco, which was a fantastic experience. Adriel's train jam is really, really fun, and I definitely highly recommend it as a way to connect with other game designers and just have a really unique experience. Um, Doing hardware, I knew was going to be a bigger challenge because it meant I had to bring everything with me. And one of the biggest challenges with hardware is to allow yourself to get to the point where you can really prototype quickly, iterate quickly. You have to have a lot of stuff. And it takes time to kind of build up those collections of stuff. Right now, I'm working on a video series for O'Reilly about hardware prototyping for play. And one of the challenges for that is that I have about 8 original kind of hardware projects that are being made for this series. And as I was kind of figuring out what they were and what I'm going to be building with them, I, had to continually make new orders to Amazon and SparkFun and Adafruit, and this is even with a fairly comprehensive library of parts. The good thing was I'd usually have an idea, and I'd have the parts I needed to kind of prove it, but not necessarily all the parts I needed to do it correctly or to completely finish the concept. So there was about a week and a half or two where there was just nothing but Amazon packages and other packages showing up at my door. Um, and let's see. Yeah, so this is just kind of that's kind of a tour of some of the projects I've been working on lately. BitBash, I had brought Choosatron, Afterglow, Tank Top, and a fourth purely physically based game uh, that actually uses, let's see, that is all components made out of felt. And the reason this game came about was I was recently at the Solid conference in San Francisco, which is put on by O'Reilly, but it's basically an Internet of Things conference. So uh, hardware-based and all about connectivity and kind of making smart things and the Internet of Things, all the different buzzwords for that. Um, and a company there was working with these small wireless modules that could dynamically create mesh networks, and they built them in the form of wristbands that had one ultra bright RGB LED in the center. And their application of it was you'd fill out a short um, questionnaire about things that you were interested in, and then they would download that onto the wristband, and you'd walk around the conference. If you got near another attendee, if there's if both of your bracelets glowed green, then you had like a certain threshold of interests in common, and you should talk to them. If red, then you don't have much in common, and you should just ignore them. At least that was kind of the idea. For me, I immediately saw a really interesting kind of platform to develop a real space game. Now, the bummer was, although I'm working with them now, I wasn't able to get everything I needed in time for BitBash, but I'd started designing this naval battle game involving real people in real space in about a 20 by 40 foot field, and 3 persons per side, and acting the role of kind of carriers and frigates in this naval battle. After I realized that I wasn't going to have the wristbands, I kind of kept going over the rule set and how it worked, and decided that I didn't actually need those components to make the game work and to make it fun. And so the day BitBash went on, I had brought a bunch of felt and a pair of scissors. I'd created the armbands I needed for each of the players, and then these islands with these removable German spies that would sit in the playfield. And the reason I bring that up is I think especially when we talk about hardware or kind of physical-based gaming, I think it's important to remember that the beauty of that there is that there's a lot of different ways to engage people, and it doesn't always have to end up digital. Now, this game on its own, like that's not necessarily something I could sell or publish or anything like that. In fact, most of the hardware games I build aren't necessarily like that. But it served as a really great way to play test some ideas I had that I can revisit uh, with hardware, maybe with those wireless mesh devices, and to take the concept even further. Um, if you look at something like Johann Sebastian Joust, the game that uses the PlayStation Move controllers, it's a very, very simple concept, very, very simple rule set, but a very immersive experience and something that people get really, really, really into. And one of the reasons for that is that having physical space games like that, or things that don't have kind of the typical glowing rectangle screens, suddenly makes them a lot more inviting, not only for the players but also for the spectators. Um, People have asked me why I haven't, or why I didn't just make Choosatron for mobile devices, where you just played them on your phone. And I said one of the problems with that is how isolating a digital touchscreen device can be, or even even playing on your console. Uh, Spectators versus the people that are playing, it's like a lot of times they're in completely different worlds. Because if you're not a part of that game, then like you're a distraction to that experience, and you're a distraction to the immersion of being a part of that experience. Um, because even though like maybe four of us are still physically here, mentally we are gone. We are in this game, and we are only concerned with what's happening in that game. With something like Joust, the real world stays there, and it's easier for people to connect with each other in those kinds of spaces without feeling like they're invading something. If someone was playing a Choosatron game on a mobile device and a stranger came up behind them and started reading the story and then maybe throwing out a suggestion of like what they think they should do, chances are the person would feel really awkward and a little bit offended that someone was invading their privacy like that. With the physical Choosatron device, it's broken down some of those barriers where a lot of times someone will be playing, someone they don't know is kind of watching and waiting their turn, and they might throw their 2 cents out, and the person is immediately like connected with them and immediately talking with them uh, about those decisions and the way that they might approach it. Or even somebody is having trouble making those decisions and is asking for help from people around them, especially like groups of friends, stuff like that. Even though it's a solo experience, it's something that's always encouraged a lot of group play, and that was something that really got me interested in continuing work in physical space and what it is to create physical experiences. When people talk about like augmented reality, I've always been very frustrated when they bring up kind of the 3D tracking through their phone. To me, it's one of the worst examples of augmented reality because I think augmented reality is much more about laying like a new world and a new story and a new narrative over the space already around us rather than just creating this small window. I think mobile devices are great tools, but instead of being the window to those stories, I think they should just be a way to connect and interact with them, where everything around you is stuff that you can already talk to. When we look at things like uh, Bluetooth Low Energy, a low-powered wireless protocol, um, it's a great example of something that allows you to seamlessly connect with things in the world around you and exchange information and have them kind of come alive. I have actually one example of something I'm working on. Let's see if we can go on a little journey here. Um, so one of the projects that I've been building for O'Reilly to show off Bluetooth Low Energy is to create tiny plastic eggs that have the electronic components inside, as well as a couple vibrational motors, like you'd find in a cell phone, and use that to either race each other or to push each other out of a circle as kind of a sumo game. But what's made it really compelling to me is that it's something that can be very, very easily set up and connected to, and something that in like a festival environment or even just at a friend's place, you can just very, very quickly allow people to connect with. So I have this very simple app. This was made in Unity, and when I hit scan, it's going to start looking for any of these small devices that broadcast themselves as these little eggs. So if I turn it on, let's see if I can do it. See? It's on, and then if I turn it off, it goes away. And I got this whole set of test devices, so you can do that. And if I had more hands, I could show you a second Android device scanning, and then after I'd pick this one, it would disappear from the list. So here I have two sliders, and let's see if I can show it. I don't know if you can see that or at least hear it, but I can push these sliders up and down and increase or decrease the vibration of the little motor. All right, so that worked okay. Super, super awkward. I need like a floating laptop, which would be a good use for a drone, probably. So, and that's one thing that I've been getting much, much deeper into lately is kind of the convenience of newer protocols like Bluetooth Low Energy, or even using standard Bluetooth to make stuff that is a lot easier for people to interact with and talk to. And that, I think that digital hardware divide is one that, is one that a lot of people have trouble with. Now, another way that lately I've been building stuff, and the beauty of this is it's something that anybody can jump into very, very quickly without any kind of programming at all. And I've been using this as kind of an introduction to making hardware and making alternative controllers, and to talk to people about kind of a concept called Burn the Keyboard. So this is a very small Bluetooth keyboard and mouse emulator. So it's a HID emulator, a human interface device. They're about $20 on Adafruit.com, and it's very similar if any of you have heard of devices called like an iPAQ or an iPAQ 2, and even the microcontroller A.T.E.R.G.L.O.W is capable of emulating human interface devices. A lot of times you can find that in the specs of a microcontroller device that you're using. But the beauty of this is, to a computer, it looks like a Bluetooth keyboard that you're pairing with. So there's no additional kind of effort that goes into connecting and talking to it. And some of the examples I've been working on to show it off is, so here is a very, very basic custom controller, and the example I was using this for is Luftrauser. So that's been kind of a demo where you've just got a couple arcade buttons, so 4 buttons, a joystick, which is basically just 4 different inputs, so you know kind of which axis is going. And then inside, you've just got one of those easy keys, EZ-KEY, And that's it. If I turn this on, it automatically connects to my laptop, and you can remap the keys or the pins on the Easy Key to send any keyboard or mouse command you want. Let's see if I can show that here. All right. Okay, so probably the easiest way to show you is, so I'm just turning on the tiny little box that I just showed you. And, all right. Let's see. So, kind of like I was saying about demos that don't work when you intend, this one appears to be mildly dead. So, I'm going to try. Okay. So, I'm actually holding a different box than the one I just showed you. It has basically a lot more buttons, but it's using the exact same stuff. And what you're able to do is just create a profile that says, okay, well, this pin on the Easy Key is this button, or it's moving the mouse this direction, this many pixels, and I'm just pressing these keys. Oh, a car alarm. And this, the game I'm showing now is actually something I'm calling mathematical. And the idea behind the game. So the idea behind this was I wanted to show that it was possible to kind of come up with a completely original game concept that didn't use any programming and was something that kind of everybody had. And so the idea behind this game was I would turn on the speech for button presses and the results, and one player would be odds and one player would be evens. And so you're both like trying to press different buttons, and you're trying to get the final result to be either odd or even, depending on which kind of side you've chosen. The one challenging part of it is that I added. So here's the box. Lots of buttons. It has a large button on either side, and then a toggle switch in the middle. Now, I daisy-chained the large buttons and the toggle switch so that neither of the large buttons would have a signal unless the toggle switch was down. So if you imagine, a button is just like, it's like this, and then maybe if it's pressed, it's like that, then it's like this. It's just a very, very simple circuit, and then it's either allowing a voltage to go through or it's not. And so when you're reading a pin that a button is connected to, you're really just checking what the voltage is at compared to kind of the known values, whether that's 0 to 3.3 volts or 0 to 5, and you're checking to see is it high or low, meaning either that peak voltage or 0, and deciding does that mean that the button is down or not. A lot of buttons have extra legs, so you can actually decide which state you want to use, whether you want the circuit being open to be the down state or whether you want the circuit closed being the down state. So once you kind of understand that, it becomes really simple to just connect multiple buttons together or toggle in buttons in order to be able to kind of get more complicated effects. So if you're holding this down, you could hit the red button, which does a clear all, or you can do a green button, which calculates the result. And the idea behind this was that if one person is holding this down, then the other person can sneak in and hit the clear all button before the first player can get a result. So it's not necessarily a fun game, but it also isn't necessarily meant to be a fun game. The idea, oh, for crying out loud. The idea there is really just to show what you can come up with. Another great idea that somebody made, and all they had was a joystick, is they had 4 pieces of string connected to it, and they made a 4-player tug of war. And I believe they just connected to a simple game that they had built with like Stencil or something like that in order to be able to have some kind of feedback. And that's actually one of the other great things about using the HID emulators is you can make a game that takes whatever kind of input, whether it's mouse, keyboard, and even complex keyboard combinations. So holding Shift and A plus Delete and L, and you can, without any additional programming work, create a custom controller that is able to send that signal in whatever form that you want. So before when I was talking about Luftrausers, what I wanted to show with that is first kind of the very mundane version of that idea, where like this controller has a very one-to-one relationship with the controls in Luftrausers. You have your joystick to turn, rotate left and right. You have a thrust button, a fire button, and then these 2 buttons that are for like pausing the game or kind of getting to the setup screen, whatever. But then I wanted to show kind of how far you can take that. And so what I did was make a bodysuit. And you have 2 wings that you put on your arms. And then in each hand, you have one of these capsules that you hold like this. And each one has a red button. And in order to fire, you have to hold down both of the red buttons. And then you also wear this flight cap. And of course, flight goggles. So, of course, a silk scarf. Because, wouldn't make sense without a silk scarf. And then along with the wings that are on your arms. And then there's a small switch that goes by your foot. And so you'd hold the switch to thrust. You'd hold down both red buttons to fire your guns. And then kind of my favorite part is right here, if you see this little cylinder, is a tilt switch. And when you're working with things like a HID emulator, anything that can just have an open-closed circuit or essentially act like a button can be used with one without any additional work. So since this is a very, very kind of analog hardware-based tilt switch, which all it is there's 2 wires going in, and there's a tiny ball bearing inside the capsule. When it tilts a certain amount, the ball bearing rolls away from the 2 wires, and when you tilt it the other direction, it rolls toward it. And then if it's touching them, then the circuit is complete. And so without having to do anything complicated at all, like having an accelerometer or something else complicated, I was able to set up the game so by holding your arms out like wings and wearing the wings, if you tilted your body left, your Luftrauser airplane would turn to the left, and if you tilted it right, it would turn to the right. And all of a sudden, you've got a very kind of awkward at first, but surprisingly immersive experience where you're very, very focused on the game. It's kind of a completely different way to think about it, and kind of the coordination between the different parts of your body and how you relate those to the plane itself. And there's kind of a process of anthropomorphizing that happens as you become that plane, and you're thinking of yourself in relationship of that plane. And it sounds really silly, but it's also really fun. And it's, I think, one of the interesting things about kind of alternative controllers in general is I think people still aren't sure what to make of them in terms of, yeah, it could be kind of cool, but what's that worth? You can't really sell that. What are you going to actually do with it? And for people that are trying to market and sell work that they've been building, there's actually a lot of good that you can get out of an experience like that. One game made by a friend of mine, Gabe, that I think does a really good job of using an alternative controller and alternative hardware for to actually like help in publishing and selling their game and experience is Butt Sniffin' Pugs, which was at ALT.CTRL.GDC last year, or this year I should say, 2015, and also was just at Bit Bash. Now, Butt Sniffin' Pugs is a two-player experience where you control these tiny little pugs, and it's just all in this one location, this little park. And you actually use this oversized tennis ball trackball in order to move your pug around, and there's two kind of special action buttons, and then the pug's butt, which has a third button embedded inside of it. The idea is that people, stick their face in and sniff the butt. So that butt would technically, I suppose, represent the other player, because in order to get additional powers, you have to sniff the other player's butt, and that opens up different possibilities. Now, the game itself is something that can be done purely on a tablet, like an iPad or Android tablet, and you could have an experience that doesn't have any of the physicality of this, and the intention is that it is published in some form and sold where you don't actually have to have the controller in order to enjoy it. But what they managed to do was drum up a lot of interest and a lot of press for their game by building this very, very, very simple controller. And I think that they wouldn't have gotten nearly as much attention had they not. So yeah, there was probably remembered that other one. Hey, there's me. So I think like right here is a great argument for at least kind of getting to know hardware enough to realize that you can do kind of this ridiculous, wacky stuff that can get you a little bit of attention. And if there's one thing that I think is really essential for getting that kind of attention, it's standing out in some way. And it's always, always, always difficult to do that because every time something new comes along, like a new platform to publish on, like Steam, there's kind of that golden era where if you can get in, like, you're gold, but then eventually it gets harder and harder, and it becomes the same old game of you have to not only prove that you have like a worthwhile product or a great idea, but you have to be able to market yourself, and you have to be able to be an outward presence and represent your work. Hardware is unique in that it isn't like a singular controlled platform that everybody's going to just start using in order to get ahead. I think it's kind of special in that regard because every time you make one of these platforms, you have an entirely new platform. Choosatron has been used for all sorts of things at this point. For libraries or a restaurant, or there's a bunch of things that have been done with it using it as its own platform. So the saturation isn't going to occur because it's hardware and that a bunch of other people are doing hardware. The saturation would occur because at some point, if it's used in enough places, then people are going to be like, oh yeah, the Choosatron, I've seen that before, no big deal. But since the entirety of that platform is something I own, that's not something that I really have to worry about because all of that press and all of that attention is positive and mine. So like even just getting into like using hit emulators, or in their case, I believe they uh, ripped apart an optical mouse, and that was the basis for the giant tennis ball portion of it. Um, which, it's kind of that, like, hack it however you need to and make that work. But there's so many simple options for doing that. Things like ALT.CTRL.GDC, I think, are um, really great forums for being able to like create this kind of work and get it out there. It's only existed for 2 years now, and it's kind of an oasis in a sea of all these very corporate companies doing very corporate things. And like it's been said to me, it's been said to John Polson, the man that runs it, that it's a lot of people's favorite thing that's there. And it's because they get to do something different. Now, the challenge with a place like GDC is it has a lot of people that are not comfortable doing different things, and it's kind of very scary stuff to walk up to something that they don't understand and like risk feeling stupid. Uh, and that's probably goes back into one of the major challenges of having hardware-based work in public is that people get very scared off very, very easily, just as easily as they get excited about it. Um, it depends on the crowd, and certainly like game festivals like BitBash or Fantastic Arcade or Amaze in Berlin. These are festivals that already have kind of a unique and audience that's alternative to a lot of the corporate kinds of events and culture. So it's a lot easier for people like that to approach something that they have never seen before and be ready for a new experience and be ready to learn something new. But a lot of people, you have to really ease them into that and make it as simple as possible for them to jump in. I guess I've been rambling for a while now, and sorry again, I'm not at my peak, so I'm just kind of all over the place. But I guess I'd like to open up for questions. Last thing I'll just quick show is this is I made this yesterday using something called Little Bits, which are these magnetic components, electronic components, where you can. So I have a servo hooked up to the knight's sword. So pushing the slider up and down will move his sword forward and back, and then the flames coming out of the dragon mouth will rotate on a motor to make it more difficult to get in. So it's like a mini golf, except without a windmill and a fire-breathing dragon instead. So this was another one of the examples that I was working on, specifically no programming and no engineering required to do it. So yeah, let's go to questions, because yeah, I'm very curious what people actually want to know, since I just kind of bounced all over the place.
Okay, thanks. For the people who might be watching the live stream on YouTube, you can also, if you'd like to ask questions, just send some tweets to the RunJumpDev Twitter account. It's just at RunJumpDev. If we've got anybody certainly in the room, we've got a mic up front. Please.
I have a question. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hi. I did have a question. I was looking into Arduino recently, and I noticed that there were some add-ons in Unity that you can purchase at the asset store. But it seems like you're saying that we don't need to actually go to the asset store to get anything to actually connect with our Arduino board and everything. That we actually can buy certain parts that should be able to notice it, and everything, because it's basically hardware, and it's able to communicate just on keyboard and mouse input. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's, I guess there's kind of two areas. So it sounds like what you're asking is, like, even though there are libraries and the capability of encode in Unity to talk to an Arduino device, you're asking that, so like you could skip that entirely and use something like the Easy Key or something else that just pretends to be keyboard or mouse, and integrate with it that way. Is that correct, more or less?
Pretty much, yeah. I was kind of surprised that you actually said that because I always thought that you had to way to connect to Arduino board and everything.
Yeah. So, and here's the difference, which is a pretty important distinction, because you certainly can do both, and there are occasions where the Easy Key or other HID device would completely replace the need to do any coding in Unity to talk to something. But the beauty of that, like that simplicity, is also the major limitation. All you can do is emulate key and mouse actions. So if I have an Arduino and I have it hooked up to like some heat sensors or a light sensor or a noise sensor, and maybe I'm sending streaming data back. So like let's say there's a light sensor, for instance, and the game is a game about light. So one example, there was a game on the DS that had an actual light sensor on it in order to recharge your light power to kill vampires. Now there, I'm most likely going to want streaming data from that light sensor. So as an analog sensor, it might have a value anywhere from 0 to 1024. And so I have this stream of values coming in of how much light there is, and maybe the Unity game is getting brighter and dimmer. Well, in that case, the HID emulator isn't going to help me because it's just doing key presses. And there might be some really hacky ways to send data that way, but at that point, the programming you're doing is already going to be equally as complex as the code you'd be writing to just read from the Arduino in the first place. So that's an example where you would want to be able to talk to an Arduino or a microcontroller using serial communication, or potentially even wireless. But if you just need, if you just need to be able to send certain movement keys, or like the tilting that I showed you, or hitting different buttons, or a joystick, then you don't have to do that at all, and you can avoid a whole lot of effort. And just make a very basic controller to do that. But yeah, serial communication is a whole other ballgame, because that's where you're just actually talking to the microcontroller. You're sending bytes over the data line or over the air. The Arduino or whatever microcontroller is receiving those bytes. It's parsing them. It's deciding what to do with them. Maybe you're creating your own messaging format for that. So if I send like a value of 2, then that means, oh, get ready for a certain kind of message. Or maybe that means it's a request for a light reading. And then it goes, okay, I'm going to send a light reading now, and then sends that back. And for the egg example I showed earlier, that's something where I do have code in Unity that's hooking into like an Android Bluetooth Low Energy library and an iOS Bluetooth Low Energy library in order to tap into the hardware on the smart device and actually send streams of data back and forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, I've got a question from Twitter. Eric Lathrop, who's part of GameDev.Lu, which is kind of our counterpart organization over in Louisville. He asks, do you write the controller software from scratch, or do you use a framework to help fill in the blanks?
So are we talking about like for these guys, do you think?
I think so. Maybe generally. Like, I guess, do you have a preference or a framework that you go to for doing these things?
So when it comes to these guys, which are all using the Easy Keys or the HID-based emulator devices, there's no code that I have to write. At Adafruit, like for these ones in particular, they have the software to change what the mappings of the values are. So it's looking at code, I suppose, in that instance, but it's not having to do any coding. And they also come with default values set up, like kind of the basic stuff, like arrow keys, spacebar, stuff like that. So a lot of times, if you conform kind of the controls that you want to use to what its defaults are, you would never even have to look at any of that. So there is no framework, there is nothing involved there. It's literally as simple as I've got a button, I've got an easy key, one line goes to ground, the other line goes to one of the pins, and I give it power, and I pair with it on my laptop just like any Bluetooth keyboard. And now when I press that button, whatever value is connected with that key, whether it's the default or whether I've remapped it, is all going to be there. For more complicated stuff, so like the egg stuff or some of the other projects I'm working on, the answer is sort of like, because I do either a lot of stuff in Unity or I also do a lot of stuff for the Particle platform. So that's a set of microcontroller devices that are just a lot more powerful than Arduinos in general. They're 32-bit and they have like one model is a Wi-Fi chip with it. Another that's coming out soon has a cellular chip. But they've done a really good job making a very easy to develop an environment. So like because I always look at the different environments that people have for their hardware in terms of, well, how quickly can I actually get set up and running? So for them, it's checking out their firmware repository from GitHub if I want to have like full control and following their instructions to build it, which has always worked really well. Or they have like an online IDE where you can code there and then hit send. But as far as a framework, I mean, I have code that I reuse. Like a lot of it is basically simple finite state machine stuff. One of the things that I don't think there's super good at educating people, whether that's like with Arduino or otherwise, is the challenge of running multiple pieces of hardware in concurrency. Because if you think about it, it's got just a big spinning loop, just like your game loop or anything else that you're working in. So like if you run an example doing an animation on a string of LEDs, for instance, you can have that running, you get it working, you're really excited, it's great. Well, now you want to add a button. And you want to add a button so when you click it, it changes the animation. Well, chances are the code that you use to create the initial animation uses delays. And a delay is basically just telling a microcontroller to waste time and not do any work. So it just stops dead, and doesn't continue through its loop. So one thing that I do have kind of a framework for as part of my state machines, and I have these classes that are hardware classes. One class kind of represents a button, another could represent the rotary for my rotary game Afterglow, and they're set up so that they have their own update loop where they check the last time an update was run, how many milliseconds they should run, and this is nice because it's not just like running everything every loop, but I can actually say like I want this update to run every 20 milliseconds, and I can change that at any time just by like checking the timestamps and moving forward. But the important part with this is that you're saving the state of anything you're doing. So with the LEDs animating, you're holding on to whatever information you need to calculate the next step in that state. So if you know the time that you started the animation, the time it's supposed to end, or rather the duration of it, and how far into it you are, very simple values to hold on to, then every frame you just recalculate, okay, based off how far into the animation I am now, here's what the values of the colors or the different LEDs should be. And then you immediately get out of that loop because you've updated your values and you've committed them to the hardware. And then after that, you're checking your button state. And like, oh, is the button down this frame? No? Okay, continues. Oh, all right, let's update the LEDs. All right, let's update our button. And that's probably one of the most important fundamental things to have with hardware and with whatever framework you're putting together, is making sure that if you ever have to use a delay, you're doing it wrong, is kind of the lesson. So framework-wise, basically state machines and making sure that all my hardware can function in a very stateful way along with those state machines. So it makes it a lot easier.
Do we have anybody else in the room who wants to pose a question? Sure. Why not?
So I feel somewhat comfortable with Arduino, and I've made some alternative controls in the past, but I didn't know about Bluetooth Low Energy, and I'm really excited about it. How would I get started in that? What directions should I start at?
Oh, that's a good question. My favorite Bluetooth Low Energy hardware at the moment is RFDuino, so RFDuino. They're these small little stackable components. There's a lot of different stuff you can get, but I liked the Arduino because of the size and that there already existed a Bluetooth Low Energy plugin for Unity that communicated with it. So that was kind of a little bit of cheating on my part, simply because I needed to get something running quickly. And they also support the Arduino IDE in terms of adding a new board type to your IDE. But I've worked with like the Red Bear Labs boards and a number of other types. Really, what it comes down to for I think protocols like BLE is getting to the point where you can really wrap your brain around serial communication, because it really isn't all that different when you go from over USB serial to BLE. But learning more about the different protocols and getting used to looking at the byte level how those protocols work. So like RS-232 or RS-485 are two very, very common serial protocols. And then Bluetooth Low Energy, where once you have that kind of control, where you understand like what's a packet, what's the header for a packet, and where's the data payload and all that, it becomes a lot easier to kind of switch between technologies like that without kind of having to worry too much about the differences between them. BLE is really unique and is special because you can talk to it from a device without having to do any sort of pairing, which is one of the things I really like about it, is I can have an app that somebody downloads, and the app knows what it's looking for. And part of the specification for BLE is that you can give the device a name, and you can give it an advertising packet so that you can filter out any kind of hardware that you don't want to communicate with. So for the egg one, it's looking for a specific name of device, and then only those are going to show up. Now, to make it confusing, you have Apple, who's creating their own specifications like iBeacon. iBeacon is basically the exact same hardware, except a different specification for how the hardware is talking to other stuff, which I find frustrating because as soon as you have different people doing it differently, it just makes the landscape more complicated. But it's not necessarily harder to implement theirs than anything else. I've gotten used to looking up spec sheets whenever something new like that comes out, and just reading it over and over again until I have a good understanding of how the data is flowing between devices. Because on Arduino and other microcontrollers, at some point, if you're getting in deeper, you're going to have to get used to kind of visualizing and understanding like byte by byte communication, or even bits. Like within 1 byte, you've got 8 flags to work with that are essentially a Boolean each. So as far as like, yeah, just getting in quick and easy, something like RFDuino is a really good way to go. Actually, the other one that comes to mind is the Little Bean. Let me double check that. Little Bean Bluetooth. Light Blue Bean, sorry. So it's made by Punch Through, but it's a great one to be able to immediately like connect with and start talking to. Um, they have an app you can download right away that just is looking for a light blue bean, can connect to it, and then you can control its pins. And it has a little RGB LED on it, so you can control that as well. And a lot of them do that where there's an app to just talk to it right away and be able to connect to each of the pins, tell it to go high or low, or read a value on it. And that's a really nice way to just get used to what's possible with something like BLE. But yeah, Light Blue Bean or RF-Duino would be great starts. And yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Cool. We've got another. Oh yeah. So Eric Hedrick on Twitter was asking, have you ever made a physical hardware game for animals, like cats or dogs?
Sadly, I haven't. I haven't had a pet since I kind of got into this kind of work. Um, but boy, that is a shame. I would love to. I have made something that pretended to be an animal, but not made something for an animal. I like hacking on Roombas, and I had made a felt outfit for a Roomba to make it act like a cat. But that was a dark time when working from home too much makes you a little nuts, and it was just nice to have something like that acted alive wandering around the apartment. But no, I haven't made something for for an animal. I think that would actually be quite a bit of fun, especially with just basic alternate controller stuff. Having an animal in a small space or in a uh, heck, even in a terrarium of some sort, you could have pressure sensors, you could have conductive sensors. Makey, like that's a great device if you want to get something that's not only a hit emulator, but has like I think it's high value resistors on it that allow it where you connect it to a ground and then connect it to anything, a banana, some Play-Doh, whatever, and then those things become buttons because they can detect a change in resistance when you touch them. So that's a really, really fun way to go. But no, I haven't done that. I think that would be a lot of fun to do. I think it would be and probably full of liability. So I would say it's probably a good hacker to try and throw yourself if you've got some cats, rats, ferrets, whatever you got lying around. But oh man, if I had a cat, I would certainly be messing with it and making weird contraptions for it. Yeah. So sadly, no.
Step over here. I've got a question. So we, as a group, we've got some hardware installations that we've done. Our group has a full-size arcade cabinet for showing local games, Lexicon. We had an art gallery earlier this year, which featured a lot of alternative controllers and things.
Awesome.
For doing that, since we've got some people in the group who do that kind of stuff, do you have any recommendations when you have to travel, when you have to go to GDC or PAC? Do you have recommendations on either building techniques to use or avoid, or transportation techniques to use or avoid, just for like reliability and things?
Yes.
It'd be great if you've got insight on that.
Oh, very much yes. And actually, this is a huge point because this actually like really influences a lot of my design decisions. Now, for something like Tank Top, it was a hot mess and just a pile of junk after I made it, and I couldn't move it more than 5 feet without it falling apart. So last week, before bringing it to BitBash, I had a little mission, and that was to replace the breadboard full of very precarious wires and packing tape with something much cleaner. And it took me probably an hour and a half or so, but I soldered this little guy together. And part of it was I wanted to have connectors on it that would actually be somewhat secure. So these connectors I purchased from SparkFun. It just was the male and female side of a connector with a little bit of wire, which then I just soldered to my controllers. The backside is not very pretty, but it's one of those things where as you're putting it together, and part of it's probably planning a little bit on paper of what you're going to do with that, but just doing one wire at a time and getting it all soldered together. So this thing saved my life. Like being able to build a strong, tiny little soldered thing where all the components, the power, the controllers, everything, I was able to disconnect and put back together very, very easily. So that's one of the things, is never, ever, 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 ever send a project to an event that's on a breadboard. Like, it will fall apart, it will break, and if you're there, you're going to have to spend a lot of time fixing it, and if you're not there, they probably just won't include it in the festival because it will have already broken down. And case in point, one of the projects sent to BitBash was not included in the festival because it was built with a janky breadboard and stopped working immediately. And so their game was not presented at all. It was replaced with other stuff. The other thing that I do along with that is I try to build it in a mobile form. So, with Afterglow, we have what's the combination? There we go. With Afterglow, I built it into a briefcase. And the decision was partially functional, but honestly, a lot of it was the fact that I knew that if I was going to travel with it, it was going to have to survive. Now, if I had had access to better stuff, I would have 3D, or not 3D printed, but laser cut more of the components so that it could be a bit more solid and also would allow me to cut replacement parts. Which is also a very nice thing to have. If at any point in the project, if you are creating something that can easily be replicated, do it and make backup components. For that, I ended up using the green plant foam from Michaels along with a lot of felt and a lot of hot glue. The main boards inside of it are kind of like with Tank Top. Once I kind of knew how it was supposed to work and had it in its final form, I made the single, completely soldered component to reduce as much as possible the number of wires that could pop out. I also take photos at every important stage, but especially at the end. I take photos of what everything looks like when it works. And it's kind of a silly solution, but that has saved me a lot because a wire pops out, and I'm like, honest to God, I don't remember which it is. And especially in frantic situations when it's supposed to be working right now, it's really nice to be able to look at a photo, look at it, look at the photo, look at it, and go, and plug it in, and lo and behold, everything's working again. So those are some of the major tips. I also almost never check luggage. I take my work on the planes, and part of that is I'm one of those people that's kind of a dick at the terminal where I'm hovering and I'm waiting for the moment I'm allowed to get on the plane, and then I get on the plane. And if I run into anybody, anybody that gives me any problems with that, I'm just like, hey, I've got prototypes on this, I'm not checking it, so I'm gonna try and get it on. And I've never had a problem with that. If I have to check stuff, with going to BitBash and going to GDC, I had my main piece of luggage that had, just whatever stuff, clothes and all that, and then I had Afterglow as one of my carry-ons because I knew it would be in pieces if it came out the other end. So between building things in a form factor that is easy to take around, like with Choosatron, that's obviously nice and compact. Even with Choosatron, I take it down to all its pieces. All the the case parts fit into a single Ziploc baggie, and then I have my like anti-static bags that I use for any electronic components, so that's an important one. Always use anti-static. And like I pack things where it's like clothes, hardware, clothes, and bubble wrap, stuff like that. So yeah, I think probably, though, the easiest is to always be thinking about that from the very beginning, like making sure that if it is not a form factor that it can travel in, that it can be taken apart. Otherwise, you're going to be miserable, and it's going to influence like the design of your work. But at the end of the day, I would rather that I'm actually able to bring it at all. So those are probably the big ones I can think of.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot that can go wrong and a lot.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, one more thing on that. I started building a kit of travel diagnostic equipment. For instance, there is a tiny little multimeter that just has the wires right in it that has this tiny little plastic case. It runs off one of the CR like 2032 kind of big fat thin batteries, or big wide ones, whatever. Super small. I always travel with one of those. I have a wireless Hakko battery-powered soldering iron and 4 of the nice like rechargeable lithium batteries. Stuff like that. Tiny screwdriver set. I have a pack that's just for events that I bring so that whenever I go and something isn't working, I can immediately test like, okay, is everything getting voltage? Okay, is this point actually connected to this point? So using the continuity with the little alarm on the multimeter. Multimeter is the best thing ever to have. So get a tiny portable one that's only purpose is to keep with you on trips. It will save your life.
Awesome. Well, we probably have time for one more question in the room. Somebody's got something they want to ask.
Oh, and my favorite ice cream is either mint chip or Napoleon, and I like calling it Napoleon ice cream, not the other one, because Napoleon's a way cooler flavor.
What's Napoleon?
Napoleon, it's some call it Neapolitan. The plebes call it Neapolitan. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I've got a silly question and then I've got a serious question. So my first question is, with all of this stuff that you work on, you know, I'm not real familiar with electronics. I'm just getting started in all of this.
Yeah.
I can't help but think it looks like a bomb. So,
oh yeah, it totally does.
Have you ever had trouble like in the airports or like with your like flying thing? Because those totally look like detonators.
I have brought Afterglow. Yeah. I brought Afterglow on many, like, not many, but like probably at least 4 flights. I brought tons of Choosatrons. I have never had a single problem because their equipment knows what it's looking for, and it's not just basic electronics. It seems to know what it wants, and I have never had a single problem. Now, last time there was this tiny little portable wire cutter that I had that I'd had on numerous flights, and all of a sudden they had a big problem with because it had a little knife on it. Just silly, because I bring razor blades on flights all the time. But well, here's a tip: if you want to bring your razor blades on a flight, just don't have them in the razor. Then they don't bother you. But in either case, like, I've never had a problem with it. They've never harassed me for it. Then again, I'm also white and male. So let's be honest, that probably affects how often they stop me for stuff. But at the end of the day, like, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. The Afterglow, it's just lots of wires, it's rotary parts, it's some displays and LEDs. One thing you need to know is you're not supposed to check lithium-ion batteries. Those are supposed to come with you on the plane. So that's actually another way I try and make the excuse of, no, I can't check this, it's full of lithium-ion batteries. But no, I've never actually had the slightest bit of trouble getting stuff on a plane that looked totally like a bomb.
I have a semi-serious question. You talked about iteration. I'm kind of curious about your work process when you get started on this stuff. Do you draw things out first, or do you just like start throwing cardboard together and piecing things together and just see what happens?
I always think that I'm gonna sketch things out, and I always pretend like I am. And actually, here's an example. So earlier when I showed the photo of like the little knight that could plunk the ping pong ball in the dragon, I made one sketch for that, and that's this. And I honestly, I think this has a lot more to do with kind of everybody's different style of learning and visualization. I'm somebody that can't take notes during stuff. Like I have to just pay attention and absorb it. And I also can't sketch to save my life. Everything always looks absolutely terrible. Um, Now, I do a lot of like kind of deep mental visualization, uh, where I am just kind of sitting and staring into space and thinking about how I want something to work. And this probably isn't super helpful, but that's honestly most of what I do. At least to the point where I feel like I have an idea of what I think would be neat. Um, and then honestly, I try to, as quickly as possible, get to cutting cardboard and taping stuff and trying to get over the problem of like messing up. Because no matter how perfect you are, like you're gonna cut something too big or you're gonna cut it wrong, and then you're gonna be a little annoyed at yourself. But I found it always goes faster if I just start. Like as soon as I have kind of an idea of what I want it to be, I just get started. For that one, I was like, okay, well, I know I want this dragon on top of this cave. So I was like, okay, a cave. I'm going to start making a cave that can fit a ping pong ball. So I made that and was taping it together, and I was like, okay, I need a dragon head, and I started kind of cutting out, and I was like, okay, I could have some jaws. So I just started cutting those out, and at first it looked terrible, so I kind of just cut out another piece of cardboard and started on that. Um, but for me, it's mostly just like, especially for electronic stuff, if I know the functions that I need, like I need to be able to work with these pieces of hardware together, then the first iteration I'll probably just get a couple of breadboards and I just start wiring stuff together and just see, does it work at all? Like, do I have the parts necessary to try out this idea? And then yeah, I just try and as quickly as possible start building it. And actually the burn the keyboard kind of concept is very strongly pro that. It's for me, it's all about learning through play rather than learning by like mimicking a process, um, and allowing yourself to not know where you're going or not know where you're going to end up, but just going with it anyway. And you'll make some stuff that's garbage, or just literally screw it up and you have to throw something away. But more often than not, I think it's gonna like allow you to get it close enough to something that is interesting to you, where you can either iterate on that and make something better or improve the idea, and then just keep moving. But the I've always had to overcome the fear to start something because I am a little bit OCD and a little bit of a perfectionist, and I like things perfect. I want to learn the right way to do something and only do it that way. I am terrified of learning the wrong way to do something, and I somehow think that that's going to be burned into my head, and I'll never be able to do it the right way because I've learned to do it the wrong way. And part of that is me accepting that there isn't one right way for anything. And the other part is that the more you can kind of let go of that paralysis and just start, the more you're going to surprise yourself with what you can make and what you can come up with and learn to enjoy that process rather than fear it. So that's kind of my process.
Well, thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Jerry, for coming to join us this evening.
Yeah.
Do you want to plug your website, Twitter, projects, stuff?
Yeah, my website is jerrytron.com. That's JERRYTRON.com. My Twitter is slightly different. It's Jerrytron, except the E is a 3 because somebody's camping on that Twitter. And yeah, I'm been working on just lots of weird little projects. I just finished a Twitter car, a remote control car, so you could have ego races between two Twitter users. And just been doing a lot of like small experiments. So that's most of what I've been working on. I'm going to be at Fantastic Arcade in Austin. Excuse me. And this isn't. I don't think it's actually announced yet because they're rebranding. But I started working with a company called Reactive Studios, head by John Myers and like David Grossman from like Monkey Island and Telltale company to work on interactive audio games and stuff like that. So still very early on for some of that, but that's something I'm pretty excited about. And yeah, just kind of making games and more weird junk.
All right. That's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's watching this who might not be familiar with our group, we're RunJumpDev. We're a game development group in Lexington, Kentucky. And if you'd like to visit us, we have these monthly meetings at the last Wednesday of every month. And then we also have weekly meetings. Tuesday is kind of our hack night. Please come out, say hi, join us up, bring something you're working on. We'd love to play test and give you feedback, help you through problems, or just see what other people are doing. And Monday nights we do an indie game night where we try to bring games that we're currently playing and we want to show, talk about design and stuff, maybe for incorporating with our own. Yeah, that's basically it for us. And thank you so much again, Jerry, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun. Bye.
Bye.